Well, hello, everybody. We're so excited to have so many folks here with us today. Want to welcome everybody to the Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Michelle Van Noy, and I'm Director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers and PI of the CCSN. Just a little bit of background, the CCSN is a group of researchers and practitioners working together to generate and share research on community college STEM pathways. We have this ongoing webinar series as well as research projects and partnerships focused on understanding how academically talented low-income students navigate pathways in STEM fields. So I'm really thrilled just to have this time with you all. Just a couple of housekeeping rules just wanted to share with you. We will be recording the webinar. And we do plan to share that with everybody later to watch and to share with others who may not have been able to join us today. We ask that you keep your cameras off typically for the duration of the webinar, but we highly encourage you to ask any questions or provide comments throughout the webinar in the chat, and we'll answer them at various points. So I just want to allow us to just show a brief video to kind of kick off the webinar, which is what culture is relevant for STEM community college transfer students, and then we'll follow that with an introduction of our speakers. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today.
I think I've always been encouraged to get a college degree. My parents never went to college, and I felt that I needed to get in a higher education because they didn't have the opportunity to do it. I did try to pursue a college degree right after high school. That didn't go well, and I ended up dropping out after 3 years. But as I lived and started a family, I saw that people that did have college degrees were making enough to provide for their family. And the biggest thing was I needed to be that person for my kid.
The STEM Bridge program is having a very positive impact on the students, and 100% of them are still in STEM. When we submitted this grant, only 56% of STEM community college transfer students were still at the U of A by their third year.
I didn't feel like I had, even like just the ability to walk on campus, and I just felt so out of place. But with the STEM Bridge program, they have always valued my time here. They have always told me like I belong here. I have the ability to do what I want to do, something that I could be more passionate or motivated about.
We have them explore STEM careers, really early on, so that they are actually finding out what they would really be doing. And also we are working with students to understand what are their passions, what do they want to contribute to society, what purpose are they trying to achieve.
When I applied for the PIMA STEM Bridge program, during my interview, they had asked me like, are you interested in research? And I told them like, I don't know if that's what I want to do. They offered me an experience to where I could shadow a research lab before I transferred to U of A. I ended up liking it and continued pursuing research after that. My peer mentor at the time had offered me to apply to Ronald E. McNair, which is a research program here at U of A year-long research program. The deadline passed, and I told him like I missed the deadline, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I was motivated enough to try it. And he told me one thing that has impacted me since that day was don't stop you from achieving your dreams. And after that, they had extended the deadline, and I applied, and I ended up becoming a Ronald E. McNair Scholar.
We need students who are going to be representing their communities. We need that diversity of perspectives, and we need students from a variety of backgrounds going into STEM careers and becoming the future researchers.
I think focusing on students that are low income, minority, parents, non-traditional age, turning students, knowing that there are people out there who have these barriers that have been successful, gives them that motivation to also succeed.
So many of the students have gone through many challenges already before they even transfer. You can see that this actually would be a really great investment because the students are so determined. If you just give them the support, then they're going to graduate and they're going to go on into these STEM careers.
When I ended up doing my first student panel, I had to give advice to students that were transferring from Pima to U of A, and it just made me want to cry because I was on the other side of that. And being the person that I needed at that moment, seeing people that are part of the program probably feeling the same thing that I was feeling, like that could never be me. And now one day I'll probably see them on there, it's gonna be a whole cycle. And I think that was very impactful for me.
STEMbridge impacts lives because students from low-income households are graduating with their STEM degrees, which is changing the economic outlook for themselves and also for their families and for their kids, and it can have an impact on many generations.
Now I'm completing my third year in my Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering. I never thought I would be a scientist, but here I am. I'm almost done and wanting to continue on to a PhD program.
As we continue the conversation after this great video, I would love to introduce to you all our presenters. We have two amazing presenters coming in here today to share their knowledge and tell us a little bit more about this amazing program and the outcomes and ways to navigate STEM Ed. So I would like to welcome Dr. Regina Delaman, Professor and Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs from the University of Arizona, and Dr. Bren Anderson, a postdoctoral research fellow at Northwestern University. So go ahead.
So happy to be here, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to begin with this video just to make sure that, we keep the student centered, right? And so especially at this time where, programs like this are under attack, the people who do this work are under attack. It's important to center students to see that, this sense of belonging, the support, the encouragement is important. And it's academic, but it's not just academic, right? And so our program has addressed both the academic aspects of this transition of transfer community college students, as well as that what we call culturally responsive support and mentoring as well. So we're going to begin our presentation. I'll begin the presentation and share my screen. Feel free to throw anything into the chat if you are unclear, and then our organizers will kind of call out the questions if as we move along there's anything that's unclear to you, but we hope to have a robust discussion at the end of our presentation. I'll ask you to forgive me if I'm having some issues with sharing at the same time that I am presenting, but I'll go ahead and start by sharing my main screen so I can kind of go back and forth with the presentation. All right, there's myself from University of Arizona and Brenda Anderson, who was a student at the time, finishing up her doctoral degree and is now at Northwestern University, and she will handle the second half of the presentation. Okay, so the first thing we'd like to do is ask you to click on this link, and the organizers can put that link in the chat again for you, or you can scan the QR code, and I will ask you to respond to this question. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge for community college students transferring into STEM majors and completing university STEM degrees? So in your professional, personal opinion, I'd like to just give you a chance to respond to that request. I'll stop the share while you're doing that. Okay. Everyone has an opinion, whether personal or professional. I know a lot of you are in these spaces. So you can respond with regard to transferring or completing the degree at the university level. I see some people starting to respond. We have credit loss, we have systemic oppression, belonging, lack of STEM identity. If others can click on that link or use the QR code. The link is in the chat. We have been finding that credit loss is a challenge, and preparing for that. Belonging, STEM identity is a big part of our process and our project. Any other responses?
There is a lot on the actual link that I see on my end, so I'm not sure. It could be a refreshing.
Oh, I see. Okay, hold on a second. Let me go back and. Oh, there we go. Just a little bit lag on my end. Perfect. Oh my goodness. Okay. Finances, as we know, STEM is the main, is a source of scholarships for students, right? So we had been giving them the finances, and that's an ongoing challenge. Feeling like a freshman when they're transferring in, the upper division coursework. We will be discussing that lack of support, again, STEM identity, credits, articulation, all these prerequisites, math, etc. The work life school balance. Yes, we're going to get into that. Community, a new environment, the stigma of a community college, complex lives. Okay, excellent. All right, thank you so much for this. This is really, really helpful, and we'll get into this, in the discussion as well. Thank you so much for that input, and we'll be able to kind of share that out as a result of the presentation here. So here's our agenda. We'll talk through the project, each of these areas with regard to the students who were involved, the persistence, our success, our program objectives, talk a little bit about the culturally responsive mentoring that is at the center of our program, and then moving into what we know from the literature that's effective and what we've written as a result of some of what we found with regard to thinking about, what does culture mean for these students? So remember, these students are transferring in from a community college and moving particularly into STEM majors. So that's a distinct, unique population within the transfer student population. So as most of you, I'm sure, already know, students who are first generation college students are overrepresented in community colleges. Those who are post-traditional and non-traditional age, right, will be found at community colleges in much larger proportions than at four-year institutions, where only 4% are over 22 years of age. We have the idea of working learners, right? And so the STEM project funded by NSF is something that will address the need for students to have to work at the same time they're pursuing the high demand STEM majors, right? So we have many more students who are working learners at community colleges, and of course, disproportionately underrepresented and low-income students. So our STEM Bridge project was a partnership between Pima Community College, which is our local feeder, and University of Arizona here in Tucson. And it was funded at $4.8 million over 5 years by the National Science Foundation to support students that we identified as completing at a relatively successful level courses that would prepare them to be successful in STEM majors upon transfer, right? And these were all identified as low-income students, either Pell eligible or utilizing the low-income parameters that were set forth in the Pima Community College. So they had some alternative ways of identifying students if they did not apply for federal financial aid. So we, over 3 years, we had 3 cohorts of approximately 30 students each year who transferred from Pima Community College into STEM majors at the University of Arizona. So we gave them these scholarships to cover tuition and a cost of living, to reduce the amount of time or eliminate time that they had to spend working, right, outside their academic pursuits. So we gave them different levels of academic advising, transfer support, mentoring, which was inclusive and culturally responsive, and 2 STEM faculty mentors. So when they were at Pima, our project began in their last year of Pima, and they were given and paired up with 1 Pima Community College STEM faculty mentor and 1 University of Arizona faculty mentor during their last year at Pima Community College. So these are the students. They were 100% low income, obviously overrepresented in terms of first generation, groups that are underrepresented in STEM. We are both HSIs. So we had a good bulk of students who were identified as Hispanic or Latinx. And then pretty much half and half men and women, one non-binary student. And among the students who identified as Latinx, the majority were first generation. So again, I want to emphasize that we did have the vast majority of our students as post-traditional, many returning adults with family responsibilities, and some veterans. So there was a range of age, but they were all, in a sense, nearly all of them were non-traditional age college students, some in their early 20s still, and some more toward middle age, I would say. Okay, so we are extremely proud of the successes we had, especially because we began in 2020 with our first cohort during the pandemic, right? And so our success rate is actually quite remarkable, and I'll try to kind of give you a sense of why I think we were so successful, beyond the brilliance, right, of the students themselves and the hard work that they put in. So here are our numbers. I'll draw your attention to mainly the last row in total. So you can see here that this is the rate. This is the full group of scholarships recipients, right? And so here we have the percent that transferred to the university, right? So we've got 97% here who transferred, and then 91% are actually succeeding in persisting and or graduating with a STEM major at the University of Arizona at the bachelor's degree level. This subset was at the point in time, end of 2024. This is the number that graduated, but it is a subset of this 91%. These numbers, since December, we had more graduates, so it's beyond 30% at this point, who are on track to graduation or have already graduated. So we're really happy about that 90+ success rate. And here's it in a graphic form. So when I went through the literature, if we really isolate the group of students who are low income and beginning at a community college and aspiring to a STEM degree, when we track them over time, according to an array of longitudinal studies, really we come out with 1 in 10 succeeding at completing a STEM bachelor's degree. Okay, so this is distinct from students who are transferring in total. These are just STEM majors and completing a STEM major, not just any bachelor's degree, but a STEM degree. Very low percent, 10%. We've reversed that trend, right? So we see 9 and 10 from our program out of our 95 total students who have already completed and moved on to a STEM career or graduate school, or who are on track to complete within some 2, some 3, and some 3.5 years post-transfer. So here are just some testimonials about this that students had said regarding being a non-traditional student, that really this scholarship and the programming was pivotal in them being able to succeed as non-traditional students with family obligations, children, opening up doors to considering graduate school in some ways for many students, and really understanding how the challenges students face, the fact that we were there for them, we were focused on them, our programming was directed to them, that many of them feel they would not have been able to continue without the support of this program. So here's a little bit more depth of what we did for the different years. I'll point your attention to the sticker and the logo that you might see. I'm very proud. I designed that logo and had it created by an artist. And so students were excited about, all kinds of stickers and gear that they were able to get as part of the project. So year 1, we have the mentoring that I told you about. The faculty went through a mentor training to be more inclusive and culturally responsive. We had staff identified both at the community college as well as at the university who were sort of shepherding students through the process. We have what's called an STU 210 class. So this is a pre-transfer course that's normally set up across the community college in partnership with the university to help students transition and learn about transfer and begin the process of transfer. So it's usually in the spring semester for students who are planning to transfer in the fall. we had a specific class devoted only to STEM majors, right? So that we can focus on their particular needs and challenges, which often are more of an obstacle than in other majors. We have the various pre-transfer workshops, summer research opportunities, etc. So in year 2, post-transfer, they maintain their University of Arizona faculty mentor in STEM, the same one, and those faculty are part of a community of practice. We have various academic supports with research readiness, with workshops on graduate school applications, continuing financial aid, careers in STEM, etc. Year 3, the mentoring continued. We had peer mentors assigned to the program, so some of the students in the program became peer mentors themselves. And we actually included and added more STEM tutoring and higher level classes for the students as a result of our formative evaluation in the first 2 years. So this is just in more detail, just to let you know that in addition to looking at just persistence and graduation, we were kind of looking at sense of belonging, improved academic achievement, and increased interest in STEM careers as objectives, as well as mediating variables to get them to the end, right? So that's also part of what we were looking at in our research efforts as part of this STEM. And so here on the right, you can see just the range of more detail about the range of supports we had available for students. So I have started talking about it as wraparound retention support, beginning at the community college for these students. And I feel that this range of supports are really important. And what I'll say about this range of supports is that since 2015, 2016, we had this program called ASEMS that students were transitioning into. So that ASEMS program, Arizona Science, Engineering, Math Scholars, was set up already for students who were first generation, underrepresented, and low income to support them as a community for first year students as well as transfer students. So when we proposed the STEM bridge, we plan to have them transition into that already existing suite of programs, right? So that was part of why I think we were so successful, and I'm going to get into this culturally responsive mentoring in a moment. The idea that we had in terms of the proposal was to bridge, right, what's happening in STEM. We called it an ecosystem in the community college, and getting students ready to enter into the ecosystem at the university, which can be very different, right? So I wanted to highlight for you, in hindsight, what I think was very important in terms of the success of the students, right? The first is we had this very strong collaborative partnership between University of Arizona, that's UAZ, and Pima Community College, right? So we had the Dean of Science of the College of Science in Pima, and we had the VP of Student Success, right? So we had very high level people who met with us monthly as an entire team, right? So all the co-PI, they were co-PIs with us. So they met with myself, my co-PIs here at the University of Arizona. One of my co-PIs is the one who founded the ASEMS program. She's a staff member, a woman of color who had an engineering bachelor's degree and didn't go any further after that, but has been dedicated to diversifying STEM, right? So she was a co-PI with me, along with a STEM faculty, we call them a career track faculty, a non-tenure line faculty who was also invested in the mentor training and has worked with STEM faculty quite a bit. So we met all together with our research and evaluation team so that we can monthly check in on what was happening, what was working, what was not working, how we might want to pivot. A lot of troubleshooting was done in those meetings. I also think having these staff was very pivotal. Rather than myself as a faculty member or any STEM faculty member trying to run this program on top of all of our other commitments as a faculty member and other research projects, I don't think would have been successful, as successful as we were to have a designated full-time project director running the project. And then we also had a program manager at the community college working with the students there as well. So this is where a lot of that wraparound retention support came, the administrative hurdles, the bureaucratic hurdles, procedural, All of the managing, the meetings with the mentors, all these things, like keeping track of what was happening, and also being that point person for the students, right? In addition to that, we had a student support specialist who was an expert in helping transfer students transition. And that was part of what ASEMS already had happening with, random community college students that applied already, right? So we fed into that existing structure of support and funded it, for the time of the project. I think the relationship building aspect of the STEM faculty and student pairing was very important to build that trust, because they acted sometimes to get information, but oftentimes to just keep modeling and supporting the student, especially in the face of self-doubt. So we found a lot of the faculty mentors addressing student self-doubt. Part of the strategies that they learned as part of the cultural responsiveness is to be vulnerable yourself, to talk about your failures as well as your successes, right? To humanize the process. And part of that relationship building really was impactful for the students, because we did focus groups every semester with the students, and they really emphasized this aspect of their continued success, enrollment, and not stopping out of their STEM pathway. We also had a community of practice where the PIMA faculty were meeting with the university faculty in STEM, right? And that was really important to talk through what some of the expectations and experiences were, and to build that community of practice. Oftentimes the STEM faculty discussed how they're invested in STEM, they're invested in these students, but oftentimes their immediate colleagues, especially at the university, were not involved in trying to figure out how to diversify STEM, how to be more inclusive, how to really support non-traditional students. And so they loved the fact that they were working together monthly in community of practice meetings, because they felt like it was a community they can feel that they had lots of similarity with, and bounce ideas off each other and help each other strategize to be successful with the students they were mentoring. Okay, so just to give you a sense of the training, we started the training in August 2020, so we had to pivot to something that was online. So they had a series of 5 weeks of 3-hour trainings, so that they can go through materials to talk about implicit bias, different cultural expressions, expectations when you meet with people in authority, like all kinds of ways to think about centering students and their lived experiences and validating those experiences. If I had to say what this culturally responsive training was like in a nutshell, that would be it. So then, like I said, they met monthly with each other, in addition to the meetings they had with the students, which ranged from weekly to monthly, honestly, depending on the mentor and the needs. And then we had 4 peer mentors who were essentially student workers, undergraduates, who also were trained in this way. And we used, if you're familiar with the SIMMER training module, and then we just added the sort of diversity, inclusion, and culturally responsive elements to that SIMMER training. Okay, so just to briefly review, just as a reminder to those who might not be aware, again, 16% of community college transfer students do end up completing a bachelor's degree in 6 years. Here are some of the kind of breakdown. And remember, it's even lower toward the 10% mark for bachelor's degrees in STEM. So these pathways and making sure there are as few obstacles as possible are really critical for students in their social mobility. And then beyond transfer, it's really important. Bren will take over to talk about transfer receptive cultures, right? I will say that, we know that in STEM fields, there has historically been very low proportions of underrepresented and minoritized students, low income, first generation as well. And there's often this transfer shock, right? And so we know about transfer shock. We know it doesn't necessarily, it results in a lower GPA. Oftentimes the research shows that this transfer shock doesn't prevent bachelor's degree attainment, but we also know that transfer shock can have serious consequences for students losing their scholarships, and it's been traditionally more difficult for them to gain higher grades in STEM classes. So this is a really critical point that we had to interject, really step in with the mentors, with our staff, to advocate for students, right, in terms of helping them decide and helping the university support students to keep their GPA up and to maintain their scholarship, right, so that they can continue in a STEM pathway, because we often see that these populations of students might remain at the university on track for a bachelor's degree, but they've moved out of a STEM pathway and into another degree program, right? And so all of our students have remained in STEM majors, right? So we consider that a tremendous success. And Bren will move forward with talking more about the transfer receptive culture and the research we've done and what we've published as a result of the project.
Thank you, Regina.
Bren, I'm just going to pop in and say we have 25 minutes left.
Okay, here I go, speedy. I would also add, Regina brought up some really good points about this bridge community of practice. I would also add, as someone who did both research on the grant and for the project, but also served as a project manager, those once a month meetings really allowed us to also figure out what were those barriers that students were encountering at the institution, so that we as a team could advocate even to administration, so that we could change different processes, but also not just processes for students transferring into STEM degrees, but also for the larger community. So there were a lot of ways that what was happening in those community of practice meetings was able to go up to really inform institutional change. So I wanted to make sure that I shared that piece. In terms of a transfer receptive culture, this was the framework that we were really thinking about as we entered into the work. And so the concept of a transfer receptive culture is central to really ensuring the success of community college students who are transferring into four-year institutions. So this concept was introduced to us by Jane Dimple. I included her book as a reference, and really some of the key elements of this culture and how it's connected to our study is first, the pre-transfer support, so really establishing transfer as a priority. And so in our study, right, we found that students who received the structured pre-transfer support from the STEM Bridge program through mentoring as well as faculty support really reported a smoother transition than other students who were in our control group. Our second one was the outreach and resources, so really helping students navigate the transfer process. And so many students in our study really talked about how they struggle with those bureaucratic barriers, such as the financial aid process, right, the credit articulation agreements, and course registration. And then the STEM Bridge program was really able to mitigate some of these challenges through the dedicated support staff, but also thinking about our coming together once a month, not only with administrators and high-level folks at the University of Arizona, but also our connection to Pima Community College. And there's some real big implications, right, for especially the outreach and the resources piece of this is really thinking about how do we move beyond the generic transfer orientation sessions, but really provide some more specific outreach and resource guides for students who are navigating different institutions. Our third piece was thinking about the financial and academic support. So really thinking about how do we reduce those barriers for the post-transfer experience. That was done in terms of the scholarships, but also helping students maintain those scholarships and those grants. Our fourth one was recognizing the lived experiences. So really validating, and valuing diverse identities and diverse experiences. As we'll talk about a little bit, our study really found that race, language, and culture shape the experiences of STEM students in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom environment. And then number 5, really thinking about that assessment and that continuous improvement, so that institutional accountability piece. And I think that while our overall project really met 1, 2, 3 in terms of the transfer receptive culture, there were various ways that we might have struggled with 4 and 5 and the ways that challenges might have arisen. But I do think that as a team, as well as through our evaluation and our continuous research, what is showing is that, we really thought about what does it mean to not only create a transfer receptive culture, but what does it look like for us to welcome students? And so that's actually a part of one of our larger findings in terms of our subculture. Do you mind moving on, Regina?
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brandon. Just a
And-
reminder, we have about 6 minutes before we want to open it up to questions. So we may have to kind of skip a few things, but just go ahead.
Okay. And so this is an overview of our paper. So our paper really just demonstrated that while mentoring and peer support structures can create a transfer receptive subculture, they cannot replace institutional responsibility. So we really highlight what a broader commitment from institutions can look like so that we can keep and support marginalized students in STEM classrooms. A quick overview of some of our findings, if you can move forward, is what we thought about is really thinking about the role of culturally responsive mentoring in our support of students. And so CRP is a critical framework for understanding how mentoring and institutional culture impacts success. And so it wasn't just about how do we train the mentors, but it was also about what does it look like given a STEM understanding. And so there are a lot of research that highlights how programs that implement culturally responsive mentoring really open up broader academic environments and success. And so that's what we were trying to really focus on, is incorporating those principles. In terms of our first piece, is that our research article really highlighted, this complex interplay between inclusion and exclusion, so power and oppression, and how that was shaped by both institutional structures as well as classroom dynamics. Yes, the Bridge program successfully created a culturally responsive and transfer receptive subculture by offering mentoring, procedural support, and validation. However, students continue to face exclusionary practices within the classroom. And so what does this mean for students as we think about the critical need to expand culturally responsive pedagogy beyond mentoring? And what does that look like both in instruction as well as institutional policy? So we broke it up first in the pre-transfer experiences, so thinking about the role of culture in STEM identity formation. Some of our findings really looked at language as a mechanism of this inclusion and exclusion. So language barriers. So when they were at Pima, students utilize their first language, Spanish, and talked a little bit about how that allowed them to create bridges of support within STEM classes. And so I think that's a very interesting, considering both institutions are Hispanic serving institutions. The second piece is the role of race and cultural inclusion and exclusion. So really thinking about Latinx and white students, right? Many non-Black students described race as irrelevant to their STEM experiences at Pima, which was likely due to the institution's demographics. And so when we're thinking about, right, being at HSI, right, having a large representation of folks who look like you in the classroom, folks do feel more accepted and supported. Whereas Black students talked about feeling isolation in the STEM classroom. And so one of the students talked a little bit about how that translated to the lack of Black representation in STEM courses and how that contributed to someone somewhat feeling like an outsider. However, once there was a transfer to the University of Arizona, there was a shift in cultural and racial awareness. There was an increase in racial awareness in STEM classrooms. So white students talked a little bit about what this meant for them in the study. Students of color became more conscious of their racialized experiences. So the lack of racial diversity in STEM made race more salient for a lot of our students in our study. And then also thinking about, yes, we can definitely post those 3 bullets. And also really thinking about what is the role of the institution, and really thinking about how students brought up this idea of performative diversity. And so once they went into their transfer experience, the role of the classroom and institutional context became salient as well. So students talked a little bit about the STEM classroom environments and how this really created and intensified a sense of exclusion, and then really brought up ideas where a critical mass of Latinx students foster inclusion. However, their STEM classrooms were predominantly white. So because of the institution being at HSI, yes, there was a large mass of Latinx students. However, once they got into the classroom environment, they were predominantly white, which made students feel isolated. Again, STEM professors and peers did not always recognize or accommodate to cultural racialized experiences, Students talked about this in the study, which contributed to the sense of exclusion. One of our larger findings of the study is the STEM Bridge program as a part of the transfer receptive culture. We introduced it as a STEM subculture and really talked about the key aspects that foster the inclusion. So the culturally responsive mentoring and peer faculty and peer mentor training, the support for procedural hurdles, the community building efforts that were very, very intentional throughout the entire time that they were at Pima, but also in their transition, and then also the continued support for academic resources. I would also add that students' experiences in the STEM Bridge program really talked about the humanizing environments of STEM outside of the classroom, and then also that emotional and academic support that students received when they were experiencing self-doubt. Lastly, really navigating that large piece in this embedded culture, which in STEM that a lot of scholars have also studied, which is this idea of survival of the fittest, and how STEM Bridge program really counteracted this by offering direct support and mentorships and helping students overcome those feelings of exclusion as well as academic discouragement. There's some large implications for this research, right? So really thinking about classroom spaces that are not culturally responsive at large institutions, the lack of racial diversity in STEM courses and how that exacerbates feelings of exclusion for Black and Native American students, and then really thinking about women in STEM experiences and the gender disparities that exist. We learned a lot of lessons from the STEM Bridge program, which included really continuing to build on from the transfer receptive culture, but also really maximizing the subculture that supported students' transitions and their goals of obtaining bachelor's degrees. In conclusion, our study really demonstrated how transfer receptive and culturally responsive support structures can really create these subcultures within STEM that mitigate the exclusionary forces that are really embedded in mainstream STEM education and academic culture. However, the findings also highlight this persistent racial, linguistic, and gender disparities that exist in STEM environments, not just at the University of Arizona, but I would argue across a lot of our institutions. Moving forward, one of our implications is really thinking about how institutions must embed culturally responsive pedagogy as well as mentoring responses, not just in STEM curriculum and pedagogy, but also thinking about how is it utilized to help design programs. And really thinking about how we ensure that all students, especially those from historically underrepresented groups, can survive and thrive in STEM fields. This is some resources that really helped frame some of our work, but also a few resources that me, Regina, and a lot of our evaluation team as well as research team have been in conversation with. We have Jane Dimple's piece around critical race theory and the transfer experience, which I would highly recommend. We have Dr. Ebony McGee's book, who is currently at Johns Hopkins and studies STEM environments. And in her book, she talks about the need for culturally responsive mentoring as well as Dr. Packard's book on thinking about STEM mentoring programs. And so these are some resources, and we definitely want to open it up for questions.
I'm going to pause and just let you know that we have this website, stembridge.arizona.edu, where you can learn more about what we've done. I'll stop sharing now and emphasize, just as we open it up to questions, the research we've done that we're highlighting today focuses on more of racial and gender diversity. But I will say that having students who are non-traditional age, we're really thinking along the lines now of what does that culture mean to respond to the culture of non-traditional age, low-income transfer students, because regardless of background, students struggle with the transition from community college to the university, particularly that climate of the classroom that Bren was discussing. One key aspect of that climate was that the faculty and instructors at the community college were invested in student learning in the classroom. When they moved to the university, they found that the classroom was more of an information sharing, and then it was up to them to do the learning outside the classroom with their peers on their own in the labs, right? And so that transition was actually one of the biggest struggles for the students. And that again relates to their obligations, right? Many of them had children. They had other people caretaking their children. They had some job responsibilities. To maintain that kind of expectation was quite difficult. To transition, because in the community college, they were able to engage back and forth with their instructors to make sure they understood the material, and that was taken away from the classroom environment. So that's part of what we're exploring, in addition to kind of the racial and gender dimensions of the classroom culture. So I'll end there and open it up to any comments, questions from the group. But it was great to have the opportunity to share today.
We do have a question in the chat. Shouldn't we think more broadly about how to change the culture of STEM?
Yes, and exactly, I exactly agree. And when I say culture of STEM, for us, it was more the culture of STEM at the university, right? And so part of where we want to move toward in moving into the future is the mentors were great. They're totally invested. We do have a lot of STEM faculty that we couldn't support who were interested in mentoring. So what we have at University of Arizona is called a Culturally Responsive Curriculum Development Institute. And so we're planning in the future to have more faculty involved in a less labor-intensive training around how to be responsive in the classroom. So we're going to have them be more involved in that. And we're hoping that will take a step toward changing this culture of STEM at the university level. The more faculty we can have involved in those processes.
Yeah, I would also add that even in thinking about our mentors themselves who also went through STEM programs, there was a lot of reflection around the ways that they also navigated exclusionary environments. And so again, when Regina talked a little bit about how students were receptive of the validation, it was because faculty members and mentors in this program talked about the ways that they also failed in STEM, or the ways that the culture also created differing experiences for them. And so I think, yes, it's about changing the culture, but it's also about giving people who are already embedded in these cultures the opportunity to really reflect on what does this culture actually do, and also how am I potentially engaged in it, reifying it, or disrupting it. And so we do have another paper that's in the works that really thinks about, again, this question, but from the perspective of actual faculty mentors who receive this training, but also have a longer trajectory in STEM.
Anyone else, feel free to also, I think you can unmute, I believe, and call out and, engage in a conversation.
Regina, this is Deborah.
Hi.
Bragg. I put in the chat, I've been privileged enough to evaluate a few STEM grants. And so I'm thinking about that as you all are talking today. And what really impresses me is the intentionality in which so many of these elements have come together in the STEM bridge and the mentoring and the community of practice. Can you talk about, is this a phase 2 STEM, or how did the design of this come about? I'm just
Right.
really curious.
Well, no, it was our first time around. We actually applied 3 times. So it was a
Wow.
track 3. And I will reemphasize that the work done in that ASEMS program for that amount of time, over, at that time it was about 9 years of work building that program, really informed, you said the systematic nature of what we did. And that's part of how we began to understand that we needed to start at the community college, because we were seeing in that ASEMS program that a lot of students transferring in were behind in terms of setting up research relationships, understanding the different major choices. We assume transfer students come in and know exactly what major they want. They might say that, but then they start to explore, and they don't really know what's the inside of the major, right? Creating peer group support, all these things, right? So that's why it was really important to start the year before, and also to know what supports were important as they transferred in and we integrated them. We will say that one thing we forgot was the research experiences during the summer between the community college, and the university. So when we realized that in formative evaluations, we were able to get some institutional support to fund some of the students to get involved with university professors in research projects over the summer. And that involves an investment of like $6,000 to $8,000 because students would otherwise be working full time during the summer, most of these students, right? And that was tremendously helpful for that easing that transition into the research spaces. Okay. The numbers on success outcomes are straight numbers of our participants, to answer that question in the chat, right? So that 91% is strictly the participants, the 95 students that we began with, right, at Pima Community College in those 3 cohorts, and their success rates. Honestly, we've had trouble tracking the students that we set up as a comparison group at Pima. And part of the reason for that is that we had so much of a challenge recruiting students into the program during that pandemic year, for instance, that we almost got all the students eventually who might otherwise be sort of eligible and on track to complete a STEM major within a 2 to 3 year period post transfer, so that our comparison group at Pima was not very large at first, right? And so we're still tracking those students who are not doing as well. Some of them didn't even transfer into STEM majors, right? But those numbers are of our participants in terms of the 91% who graduated or are still on track. Okay, let me try to go down here with the thank you for these questions. More about the community of practice. So one of our PIs is a STEM faculty member, and she ran the community of practice meetings. So the faculty members who were STEM mentors would get together and just really informally discuss, this is what's happening, this is a challenge I'm having, even down to my student keeps canceling our meetings, right? How can I reach out in a way that would allow me to develop a better relationship, right? To get them to just come and speak to me. Others talked about just strategies that were effective in opening up and creating that relationship, right? They also shared, oh, I'm having trouble because my student, is struggling with the fact that they reverse transferred several years ago, and now their GPA is populating as very low, right? And so, I mean, things, everything under the sun. It wasn't necessarily structured. It was a space for them to share successes, challenges, best practices as mentors, right? So after the training, and our co-PI would refer back to some of the training materials, right? To say, like, remember when we talked about this? Let's talk further about, this type of challenge or experience. And so they did that throughout the year, and they met monthly for the post-transfer, right, for the students. And then they met monthly while the students were also at Pima. Okay, discipline specific. Okay, that's a very, very good question. You'll see that one of the slides I had the picture of the mentors. We actually found that the identity of the mentor, it was difficult, right? Here at the University of Arizona, we don't have that many we don't have that much diversity among STEM faculty, right? Especially tenure line. So there were a lot of, white, cisgender, people in our mentoring group, but it was that personal relationship that mattered, that openness to their students' lived experiences that really was fundamental, right? And so we also were not able to pair people by discipline, right? So oftentimes that mentor acted as almost a mechanism to connect them to other faculty in their discipline or to find out information in their discipline. We did end up with half engineering students, I think because of their pathway and trajectory at the community college. So then we tried to recruit more engineering students in to pair with the students. But that community of practice was pivotal because not every mentor was in the discipline. Each mentor had 8 students, right? So we couldn't pair by discipline, but that would have been ideal, right? We were just restricted in terms of the initial proposal and the funding, because 60% of the money goes to the scholarships, right? And that's important. I know we're running up on time. I hope did I not answer any of the questions?
You missed my simple question.
Which
Sorry.
one was that?
It was whether you had a mentoring connection between students. So students at U of Arizona and
Okay.
Pima College.
Yes, we did. So the peer mentors that we structured in from the start, they're all University of Arizona undergraduates in STEM. So in that year at Pima, the four peer mentors were working with that cohort of 30 students. They were present in that STU 210 class. They did presentations, they developed relationships. They let students know what to expect once they transferred. And then those peer mentors sometimes were replenished, sometimes they stayed the same. And oftentimes, like I said, some of the students at Pima, once they transferred, they became a peer mentor as well. So that connection was consistent throughout the 3 years.
Well, seeing as though we're at about time here, really just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thanks so much to Regina and to Deborah Brenda for sharing this great research with us. I also wanted to thank Maria Espino and Deborah Bragg as well for their instrumental role in helping us to organize and coordinate this, and Maria, newly a co-PI on the project, really taking the lead on this webinar series. Many good things to come this spring on the project overall, so everyone look out for some more information if you're interested in partnering with us on research for the CCSN, getting involved in research fellowships, and also thinking about ways to bridge the research to practice divide through some clinics that we're preparing to launch in the coming year. So many good things, as well as another excellent webinar to come in a couple of months. So thank you everybody again, and we'll be sharing out the recording with everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. And thanks again, Regina and Brenda. We really appreciate all these insights. This is really wonderful, a wonderful set of resources, and thank you again for your insights here today. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. Feel free to follow up individually with me and learn more and partner as we move forward.
Thank you, guys. Fabulous job.
Thank you, everybody.